Painting of the Dead, from Baffling Mysteries, number 12, December 1952, a portrait that holds the key to a deadly past. "Gordy, come away from that painting," Marcia called insistently. "Why are you staring at it so?" For a moment, Gordon Haverstraw did not answer. It was as though he had not heard his wife. His gaze was fastened broodingly to the large picture fastened to the wall of his living room. Then with a sigh, he tore himself away and returned to sit by his wife's side on the sofa. "Really," Marcia said, "if I had known it would affect you so, I never would have brought it home when I found it in that little art shop. In fact," she added reflectively, "I have a good mind to get rid of it if it's going to upset you so." "No," Gordy shouted impulsively. "Leave it where it is. You must not touch it." Almost unwillingly, his eyes traveled back to the painting. Somehow it seemed to dominate the room, and though he could not fathom it, Gordy felt that his destiny was tied up with what was taking plots upon the canvas. Actually, the scene was happy enough. It was a picture of a boating party of some 50 years or more ago, and the steamboat was traveling up the Seine River. The passengers depicted by the artist were a motley crew, but all in all, they seemed to be enjoying themselves in the bright summer sunlight. The artist had caught such a lifelike quality in his painting that it was almost as though the people were about to speak, and Gordy seemed to hear their happy chatter in his ears. And yet to Gordy, there seemed to be something more about the scene. He seemed to sense a premonition of disaster, as though at any minute tragedy and evil were to take place among that happy lot. Particularly Gordy felt himself drawn toward one of the members of the party who could not be completely seen. The man was sitting near the railing of the boat, and only his back was visible to someone glancing at the picture. But to Gordy there was something furtive about the way the man sat, as though he'd deliberately hidden his face from view, as though he wanted to make sure the artist could not catch and imprison his guilty features forever on the canvas. There was something awfully familiar about the fellow. Gordy pulled himself together with a start. How could he know so much about a figure painted upon an ancient canvas? He mused. He searched his memory, but the answer seemed to elude him, and yet he felt this thing. He was sure with every fiber of his being that something evil was in this man, and that death walked among the boating party, and then, with some deep inborn premonition, Gordy knew that he would take part in it. Twice during dinner, Gordy felt impelled to traverse the distance to the living room to gaze upon the painting. But each time he found that all had remained in place. All was the same in the painted boating party. It was as if the fatal hour had not yet come. Finally, it was time to go to bed, and wearied by his unease and tension, Gordy slowly followed his wife upstairs. But sleep did not come easily to him. Twice he was awakened by the mournful baying of some dog somewhere out in the marshes that bordered his English countryside estate. And then again Gordy fell into fitful slumber. This time when he awakened, there was no sound within the house. He sensed it was the deepest part of the night, and there was just the sound of Marcia's even breathing from the other bed. Somehow, even while coming over from sleep to wakefulness, Gordy knew that this was the moment toward which all time had driven him, even in his rise from a poor London boy to a man of wealth. He threw the covers back from his bed and stepped to the floor. There was no sound from his son's room, which he passed without looking inside. He traversed the stairs softly down to the living room. As he approached the painting, it seemed to be illuminated by some inner light, and it was as he'd expected. Now the figures in the painting were standing as though they were about to move on to another part of the boat, and the man by the rail had risen too, his face still unseen, but he looked as though he were about to turn. Something seemed to be drawing Gordy toward the picture, and he stepped closer, closer, until he was level with it, and then suddenly he felt the shock as something sucked him forward. Gordy found himself standing at the rail of the boat, watching the other members of the party, and he knew immediately why he was there. He was Gordon Haverstraw, a young Englishman who had left his wife and child in London and had traveled to Paris for the firm where he was a bank clerk. There in a cafe, he had struck up an acquaintanceship with the famous artist, Sonvay, and the old man had taken an immediate liking to him. He treated him many times now to wine, and today he had invited him along on this boating party which he intended to paint. Dimly, as though he remembered it happening once before, Gordy knew what he must do. He had accepted Sonvay's invitation with that plan in mind. All during the week, he had coveted the thick pouch of gold coins that the wealthy elderly artist always carried with him. It was more than Gordy earned in 6 months in his lowly. Gordy had soon to return to London, but before he did so, he would take Sonvale's gold with him. Every move of his plan to rob and kill Sonvale had been carefully calculated. While Sonvay had been painting the picture, Gordy had hidden his face from view so that later there would be no pictured evidence that he was ever on the boat. There was so many people on the trip that he knew he would not be missed once he had carried out his deed and swam away to safety. Now as people walked about, Sonvay approached him. "Well, Gordy, mon frère," the old man said genially, "will you let me buy you a drink? You will be returning soon to England, and I shall miss you." Gordy shook his head. "No, the motion of the boat has made me lose my taste for wine. Go drink alone, Sonvay, and I will meet you in the stern of the boat later." The old man patted him kindly on the back and ambled off just the way Gordy knew he would. For a moment, as he watched Sonvay enter the lounge, Gordy knew a twinge of regret for what he was about to do, but then he shook off any emotion about his treachery, for to him gold was more important than any bounds of brotherhood or friendship. Gordy lay in wait in the hold of the boat, watching for Sonvay's return. The sun had gone down, and the passengers were all within the lounge, the sounds of their laughter coming upon the evening breeze. Presently he heard staggering footsteps coming his way, and he knew it was Sonvay returning for their meeting. The artist had drunk much wine, Gordy thought, and it would make it that much easier. "Is that you, mon frère?" came Sonvay's uncertain voice as he peered through the twilight. Gordy did not answer from where he crouched, and the old man wavered forward. "Mon frère?" he questioned once again. Quickly, Gordy stepped from his hiding place and grabbed Sonvay. He wrapped his fingers around the old man's throat, his nails digging in to keep any sound from escaping the other's throat. His dagger was in his hand as he whispered menacingly, "Not one sound, Sonvay, or you die." The old man quivered acquiescently in Gordy's grasp, all resistance drained from him, and Gordy thought that made it so much easier as he plunged his knife home. He felt the blade slide smoothly into the old man's flesh, felt the instant stiffening of his victim as the dagger entered, and then Sonvay seemed to go limp in his arms. Gordy extracted the purse of gold coins, and then for a moment he released his grasp, and it was in that moment that the old man seemed to come alive. With his last remaining strength, he grappled in a macabre, silent manner with Gordy, not even able any longer to cry aloud. Frantically, Gordy tried to twist out of Sonvale's grasp, and it was then it happened. As he struggled backward, Gordy's foot became entangled in a coil of forgotten rope that lay on deck near the railing, and with an inarticulate cry, Gordy felt himself lose balance and trip over the edge of the railing, dragging Sonvay with him. Gordy cried, "Help! Someone save me!" as he hit the cold river water and could not release Sonvay's death clasp from his neck. Frantically, Gordy tried to avoid the rushing steamboat motors, but even as he thrashed about, he was caught in the whirring machinery. Even as his last screams were cut off, Gordy knew suddenly that he had been called upon once again to pay for his crime against friendship and trust. In a flash, he knew that he had killed Sonvay several times in the past, and that his rest was not yet in sight. He knew that yet again and again his penance would be to return to this deed until his line died out. As early dawn came through the window of Gordy's bedroom, Marcia stirred in the opposite bed. "Gordy, it's time to get up," she called. She turned then and viewed Gordy's empty bed. She hurried downstairs and into the living room. There on the carpeted floor before the painting she found him. She knew that Gordy was dead even as she approached him, but a scream rose in her throat as she viewed his body. Gordon Haverstraw lay mutilated almost beyond recognition, as though he'd been caught in some giant threshing machine. He was dressed in clothes such as were worn by the man as the picture before which he lay, and they were caked with the slime of some river bottom. and as his sightless eyes peered upward, his hand seemed to curl around the small leather bag of gold coins he held. Even as she gazed at the sight before her, through the house came the wail of Gordy's small son, as if in premonition of the fate that someday would befall him. The end.
The preceding thrilling story has presented for your enjoyment. This classic work is now in the public domain, making it freely available to be shared and appreciated by all. Some elements may appear outdated or insensitive by today's standards, but we present this work in its original form to preserve its historical context and literary significance. Sit back, relax, and indulge in this timeless tale. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Every bit helps this channel grow. Thank you.